A lot of people seem to have become blind to the idea that racism exists today. But whether people know or don't know, it is important for me to let those who aren't aware of it know that it in fact does exist. I know from my own personal experience as an African American who attended a predominantly white high school and is now attending the University of Wisconsin, where white students make up about 74% of the population, compared to blacks that only make up 2%. I will be engaging in a rebuttal argument where I will present information that I found that shows African Americans aren't experiencing racism at these predominantly white universities, and debunking these arguments that show that we actually do experience racism. During my research, I have found that African Americans at these predominantly white universities are generally not happy, and in fact they're experiencing depression, anxiety, and suicide rates that actually shocked me. Suicide is the third leading cause of death in African American youth students ages 15 to 18. In this article, I learned that most of these suicides are due to the fact that on average, African Americans receive a lot less emotional support than other races. Some argue that anxiety is the leading mental health issue in all college students, and depression is common amongst students attending tough universities. The faulty thing about this argument against the fact that African Americans are generally not happy at these universities is that they aren't looking at the cause to each individual racial group's mental health issue. Overall, all college students are experiencing anxiety due to the worrying of grades, financial aid, as well as sports performance. But in this case, we look at the causes of depression. It usually comes from the fact that African American college students with non-supportive families and African Americans who felt their community was non-supportive will be more likely to experience suicide and these mental health issues. So generally, African Americans don't feel comfortable voicing their concerns to various college campuses because they fear being judged. A safe place is a place or an environment in which a person or a category of people can feel confident that they will not be exposed to discrimination, criticism, harassment, or any other emotional or physical harm. If I was able to express my feelings at some point to someone, that had to be a safe place, because I knew I could comfortably open to them about some things that I felt. For me, a safe place was my dorm or locker room or anywhere I would be around my friends. I knew I could talk to them about my problems, so where they were is where I considered my safe place. My thought was quickly changed, though. I learned that there is another view that is now ascended. It's a horrible view, which is that I need to be safe ideologically. I need to be safe emotionally. I just need to feel good all the time. And if someone else says something that I didn't like, that is a problem for everyone else, including the administration, a student said in a study. What this is saying is that, yeah, someone has the freedom to speak about what they feel, but if someone doesn't agree with how they feel or if it is wrong, the listener has the ability to speak out on what they heard. So this diminishes the entire idea of the safe place, that one can express their ideas without being criticized. Success is a hard term to define because there are different levels in which others define themselves or as success. When it comes to these predominantly white universities, I will talk about the hindering success of African Americans in their academics. A lot of people are aware that African Americans attend these white universities because they are typically the Division I schools that have the top tier sports programs. Of all student athletes in Division I football, 55% were African American, 39% were white, and a total student athletes in Division I men's basketball, African Americans accounted for 50%, while white athletes accounted for just 26%. They argue that because the ratio between blacks and whites favored the blacks, that these teams are typically high-rated and winning teams. Blacks at these predominantly white institutions are considered successful. In my argument, this argument is faulty because it doesn't touch on these athletes. It doesn't touch on how these athletes are doing academically and the struggles they experience outside of sports. We now see the triggers, race-related stressors that some were blind to, and it allows you to understand why African Americans who study at primarily white institutions are experiencing mental health issues at a higher rate. People who have become blind to these ideas of racism allow for these mental health issues of African Americans to continue because they are allowing themselves not to help in the ending of the cause and effect of these stressors. It is a job of everyone to be able to open their eyes today and realize that racism, in fact, does exist today. and are affecting the lives of African Americans. Once we are able to act on any of these actions, it will allow for African Americans to be more comfortable in our world, and this will create a great change. If this change fails, people will continue to be blind to the idea of racism, and this will result in the continuation of African Americans experiencing these race-related statuses and lead to the horrible causes of these mental health issues.